Good morning again, and a blessed Easter to all of you and your families. I really have been looking forward to being here with you today, and I especially want to thank Father Lou Tilka for his invitation, but also for kind of teeing up my homily by telling people that if you came to the 9 o'clock Mass, you would get a good homily and it would be short. Thanks a lot, Father Lou. You can put your stopwatch away now. There's something quite remarkable about the gospel text that we have today. For on this day, we celebrate Jesus being raised from the dead, coming out of the tomb of death. And yet Jesus is nowhere to be found. We do not hear of an appearance. And I would imagine that if we thought about it, we probably would have scripted the resurrection a little differently. We would have had Jesus show up at Pilate's palace or Herod's porch and made it the biggest "I told you so" in the history of humanity. But that was just a little bit too much Hollywood for Jesus. Instead, what we have is how the resurrection transforms the lives of those early disciples, how it reshapes their whole destiny and puts them on a whole new trajectory for life, giving life a whole different meaning and significance. And that transformation, we are told, begins not by giving them an understanding about things, a cognitive recognition, a kind of faith by which they hold on to a conviction, but rather it comes in their love for the Lord. Mary comes early in the morning in the darkness, not because she's expecting to see the tomb empty and Jesus risen from the dead, but because she loves the Lord and wants to anoint his dead body. And we are told that the one disciple who ran ahead of Peter was able to do so with enthusiasm, not because he believed at first, but because he loved. And so today, as we come here on this Easter day, the promise given to us is that the love that we have for Christ will be the starting point for the renewal of our faith this day. For if we're all honest, we are here today not just because we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but because we love him. And that has moved us, attracted us to be here today. And we should look for ways in which that love is stirring up in our hearts in a new way, so that our lives truly can be transformed, that we can love this Jesus of Nazareth, who has been a part of our lives and our journey. In 2003, my father died, and it was a very difficult moment for my mother. They had been married for 57 years. And she found herself beginning to doubt whether or not she would ever see him again. Her faith had always been strong, but yet doubts were creeping in. Was this over? Was this all there was to it? Every day she found herself going to his grave. But that was kind of easy because my parents lived right next door to the cemetery. And in fact, when they had bought the property, the graves 25 years ago, neighbors and relatives and friends were kidding them that they were trying to, in some way, fast-track themselves to eternity. After a while, as she looked out her window to where the grave was of my father, she decided that on his birthday, their anniversary, the day he came back from the war, and Memorial Day, she would have the caretaker of the cemetery put one of those nice, big 8-day candles that we have as sanctuary lamps in our church on his grave. And she could literally look outside her window at night when doubts began to creep in and loneliness gripped her heart, and see that light. It was a reminder to her that even though my father had died, the love they had for each other still remained. Death did not destroy that. And that gave her great consolation and was the source of the renewal of her faith. It didn't start in her head. It started in her heart. And the promise given to us this day on Easter is that is precisely where God's grace is working in our lives this day, reshaping, transforming our hearts, to be able to love, as the prophet Ezekiel says, so that we no longer have hearts of stone, but hearts of flesh that love the Lord. That we also have the capacity to love as Jesus did, as we heard on Good Friday, to the very end. To the end that allows us to overcome worries about life and doubts that are there. To the end that allows us to forgive people who have harmed us, who have insulted us, mistreated us, who have been angry with us, and we have had anger in our heart. He gives us the grace to overcome all of that. And He gives us the grace to live our lives so that others can live. You here at St. Julie's have a wonderful record of doing that. I know about the way that you have passed on the faith to your children in your religious education programs, the way that you come together to serve the poor, the wonderful ministries that you have of serving those who are in need within this parish. You do so not just because you have a conviction in your mind, but because of the grace moving in your hearts, which is God's grace, changing your hearts. And every time that you come here to celebrate the Eucharist, and you hear that the Lord takes bread, breaks it, and says, "This is my body," and allows wine to be poured out just as His blood was poured out on the cross, and say, "This is my blood," the promise given to you is that you will have the capacity, not on your own, but by God's grace, to allow your lives to be broken for one another. That you will have the capacity to pour yourself out, pour your life out so that others may live. My invitation to you this day is that when you come to communion and you receive the body and blood of the Lord, that you will remember that. That the risen Lord is present in our midst, changing your lives, transforming you, giving you that capacity to love to the very end, as He did on the cross. That's why you have come here today, because deep down in your hearts, you hunger for that kind of love. You know that that is the kind of love that God calls you to, and you can put aside that old way of life that St. Paul talks about in the second reading. You can take the next step, the next journey, as the disciples did. It's a reminder that you have come here today because you love Him, just like those early disciples. You may not understand everything about your life. You may still have vexing problems that are there, but you're willing to take the next step because of God's grace. A grace that allows you to have your lives broken for one another and poured out. That's why we say Alleluia today, and He is risen, because He's risen in us.